And welcome everyone to our special program, Resiliency Through Adversity, the Chinese Economy in 2022. I'm Michael Wong here in Beijing. Now, as China's major economic data is released for 2022, we recap how the world's second largest economy maintained stability and resiliency despite challenges posed by the pandemic last year. My fellow anchors and reporters are joining us from across China to bring us what's happening on the ground with regards to China's economy. And we'll also have the chief China economists from Morgan Stanley and Hang Seng Bank China to share their insights as well. Now, according to China's Statistics Bureau, the world's second largest economy grew 3% in 2022. My colleague Zheng Junfeng is at the news wall to break down the numbers for us. Junfeng?
Hello, Michael. Lots of numbers to digest. First, China's industrial production maintained modest growth in 2022. Industrial added value increased about 3.6%, and high-tech manufacturing investment increased 7.4%. Well, the star performer is the new energy vehicle, its output rising almost 100%, 87.5%. And however, declined among them were the industrial profits. Understandably, in 2022, it declined 3.6% in the first 11 months compared to 1 year ago. Consumption was relatively weak in 2022 due to pandemic disruptions. Total social consumption fell 0.2%. In that, restaurant revenues declined quite a lot, more than 6%, as people couldn't get out to dine out. Well, we see that rural consumption declined 0.3%, but rural consumption actually remained flat because the pandemic had quite little impact in rural areas. And we see that people, while they stay at home, they spend more online. We see online retail sales increasing 4%. Consumption is still the key for China's economic recovery in 2023, with the easing of COVID-19 policies in China and reopening of China's borders. Consumption is widely expected to see an uptick after the Chinese New Year holiday at late January. Now we see fixed asset investment. It was a stabilizer of China's economy in 2022, with total investment increasing 5.1%. Among them, infrastructure was the pillar, growing by 9.4%. Manufacturing doing very well, growing by 9.1%. Among that, high-tech manufacturing surged almost 19%, and medical equipment manufacturing rose almost 30%, apparently because of China's more demand for medical services and equipment. But however, we see real estate investment declined 10%, dragging the whole thing. It came with softening home sales, which tumbled 24%. Now, with three arrow policies, China's real estate sector is expected to stabilize in 2023. Last but definitely not least, in 2022, China successfully maintained inflation at 2%. That's a very stable and healthy figure compared to very high consumer prices in major world economies such as the US at 7% and Europe above 10%. China kept inflation healthy in the past 3 years, 2020 at 2.5%, 2021 at below 1%. That was largely thanks to China's complete industrial chain and pandemic control measures that secured farm and industrial goods production. And of course, weak demand also played its part. But it gives Chinese policymakers ample room to adjust policies to stimulate the economy in 2023 if necessary. Back to you, Mike.
All right, thanks for that breakdown, Junfeng. So, as Junfeng just mentioned, investment, especially infrastructure, has played an important role in stabilizing the Chinese economy. Now, for more on this, let's get to our Wang Tianyu in central China's Hubei province. Tianyu, thank you so much for joining us. So, I see some busy construction work happening on a bridge behind you. Tell us where you are and what's happening on the ground.
Well, Michael, it's a little bit complicated to say where I am right now because the specific place I'm standing right now is in the territory of the city of Huanggang. But if we go across the river, the Yangtze River, it will be the nearby city of Ezhou. So I'm kind of in the junction. And the construction site behind me is exactly to better link these two cities. And, it is a double layer suspension bridge called Yanji Yangtze River Bridge, and the main span of it is 1,860 meters. And whenever it's finished in 2025, it will replace another bridge in Hubei's capital city, Wuhan, to become the largest that kind of bridge in the world. So the bridge, since it's a double layer, and the upper layer is a highway and the lower layer is an urban expressway, so it will not just connect these two cities, but also further link different areas in Hubei province or even overall the central part of China. Michael?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of these dual-use bridges popping up all across China. And of course, Tianyu, we know that China is well known for its efficiency when it comes to infrastructure construction. So how would you describe the overall performance of infrastructure construction in China last year?
Well, Michael, 2022 is definitely a tough year. It's unforgettable for many Chinese like me because we've been through so many strict COVID restrictions, especially in the first half of 2022. And because of the pandemic, the year-on-year economic growth in the first 6 months of 2022 was actually dragged down to only 2.5%. But actually the speed of China's infrastructure building was still there. And I'll give you some numbers, which are the data just coming out this morning. And China's overall fixed asset investment was up 5.1% year on year in 2022. But that for infrastructure jumped even higher with a 9.4% growth. And the planned total investment of newly started projects increased by 20.2% over the previous year. So you see the fast speed growing on infrastructure development was pretty much immune from the pandemic. And this construction is like a mirror of China's high-speed development on the infrastructure building. Because, over the past few decades, many of China's infrastructure projects was like a driving force for the country's economic growth. And I'll give you some big names like the Three Gorges Dam and the very famous Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge and the South to North Water Diversion Project. So a lot of spectacular mega projects that you see on the video platforms are actually made in China. And I would like to, why the country is so fascinated with building all those projects. I would like to quote with a very simple Chinese saying that if you want your people to get rich, build a road first. Back to you, Michael.
Absolutely, Tianyu. Building infrastructure now means laying the foundation for future growth. Many thanks for that report. Our Wang Tianyu for us in Huanggang in central China's Hubei province. Well, aside from traditional infrastructure, China is also stepping up efforts to boost new infrastructure construction, such as 5G base stations and big data centers. Our reporter Guo Tianqi has more.
Digital applications are not only for mobile phones and computers, but also applicable for traditional transportation infrastructure. The 157 kilometers highway from Chengdu to Yibin is being called China's first total factor smart highway. There is a smart pillar every 800 meters equipped with radar and cameras to collect road information. This allows drivers to be informed by phone or apps about traffic or accident problems ahead of them, and to receive suggestions of alternative routes. The information can also be used to quickly send police and other emergency vehicles to accident locations. For that to happen, high-speed internet is essential.
The internet infrastructure is the blood vessel of smart infrastructure, connecting all the components on the smart highway, and the low-latency network is an important guarantee for real-time monitoring.
Each pillar has a computer for preliminary calculations, but it still requires a lot of computing power to support it.
Here is the brain of the Chengyi Smart Highway. When an accident occurs, the smart pillar will recognize the event within 1 millisecond. And within 1 second, the information of the driver and the location of the vehicle will be sent to the police and other vehicles on the road.
China is weaving a new infrastructure construction network to absorb the scientific and technological achievements of the digital revolution into the real economy. For example, the construction of smart highways requires the coordination of multiple departments and technical support from scientific research institutes. Applications for users are developed by leading internet companies.
每年都会有几个阶段跟
We attach great importance to overcoming the difficulties in technology and application with our partners. Through our successful practice, we can reduce the cost and help popularize our smart highway construction in other regions.
Last year, the Shudao Group alone has built more than 1,000 kilometers of smart highways. Zhejiang, Hunan, Shandong, and other provinces also built multiple smart highways. With such convenient infrastructure, autonomous driving may not be far behind. 郭天琪 CGTN 成都四川 Province.
Well, China's retail sales fell last year due to the pandemic. However, with COVID-19 infections easing, the momentum of consumption here in China is gaining steam, especially with the upcoming Lunar New Year. Our Zhuzhu is now in southern China's Guangdong province with more. So, Zhuzhu, what are you seeing on the ground in terms of retail spending in Guangdong province?
Thank you, Michael. So I'm now here in major Guangdong province in the shopping mall here, and you can see there are many people behind me doing their Spring Festival shopping. And you can also see many sales promotions here, for example, like those discounts and also many lotteries. You can see a 21% off for all the products here, and also for like a 50 yuan discount for every 200 yuan spending. I've talked to several salespersons here, and they told me that their daily customers have basically recovered to the pre-pandemic level. Because, you know, in the past 3 years, due to the tougher COVID restrictions, many people who are working in those bigger cities like Guangzhou and Shenzhen haven't returned to their hometown to celebrate the Spring Festival holiday. So this year, with their coming back and also with their loosened COVID restrictions, those businesses here are really just bouncing back. And also for the online part, if you look at the data, according to food ordering platform Meituan, the online orders for the catering sector in Guangdong also surged nearly 140% during the 3-day New Year holiday that just passed compared with the previous week. And also Guangdong province also ranked the top in all provinces in terms of consumer consumption scale in the past 3-day New Year holiday. Back to you, Michael.
Zhuzhu, it looks so festive where you are right now. Make sure to bring us back to Beijing some of those delicious snacks you can find back in Guangdong province. But I also want to ask you, Zhuzhu, what measures have the province carried out to boost spending even further?
Yeah, the Guangdong province has been carrying out a series of measures to boost spending. For like those bigger cities, it is subsidizing about 50% of the total consumer coupon spending. And also for those smaller cities like Zhenjiang and Meizhou, the government is subsidizing nearly 70% of all coupon spending. It is handing out those vouchers, digital vouchers, and it's very convenient to use. During my stay here in Meizhou, because I ordered a lot of online food deliveries, and I found that there are just many digital coupons. I can just click on them and I can get a very quick discount for the products that I bought. It's just very convenient. And also, apart from these supermarkets and shopping malls, in those outdoor areas, the government is also allowing those smaller food vendors to set up booths and also stores in those outside areas, in certain areas. So I can see that, especially with the approaching Spring Festival, many people are coming back to gather with their family and friends to eat those night food and night snacks and also to shopping together. So I can just see that the business here is really bouncing back. I've also talked to several small business owners by the street. They all told me that their customers are gradually recovering, and compared to the pre-pandemic level, it's just basically the same. So they are really having a very happy New Year. Back to you, Michael.
Well, Zhuzhu, Guangdong province is targeting growth of over 5% in 2023, and of course, consumption will definitely play a big part in that. Many thanks for that report. Our Zhuzhu in the city of Meizhou in southern China's Guangdong province. Well, China has unveiled a new guideline to further boost domestic demand. The guideline says that expanding consumption and investment demand will help the country to pursue high-quality growth. Take a look.
The outline of the strategic plan for expanding domestic demand aims to promote China's high-quality growth and long-term development. To accomplish these long-term goals, efforts will be made on various fronts. The country will first take steps to foster consumption growth. Traditional consumption will be further upgraded by 2035. The quality of service consumption, especially in elderly care and childcare sectors, will be largely promoted. The outline also highlights the significance of supporting new forms of consumption, such as the sharing economy and encouraging green consumption. Investment is another driving force of expanding demand. To optimize the investment structure, the outline has also emphasized the importance of expanding the investment scope in the manufacturing industry and traditional infrastructure. New infrastructure such as 5G and artificial intelligence will also be key areas. The outline also calls for the need to deepen reform and opening up, such as optimizing the business environment and expanding international trade cooperation. At the same time, the guideline highlights the efforts to boost employment and lift residents' income to bolster common prosperity. It also calls for reducing the gap between rural and urban areas. These steps will be helpful to cultivate and release more potential for domestic demand. To better meet demands, the plan states that the quality of the supply side should also be improved, especially in high-tech and intelligent sectors. Improvements will be made in key areas where effective supply capacity is insufficient.
Well, steady policy support helped China's real estate sector weather the downturn pressure and stay on the growth path. The People's Bank of China, the central bank, lowered the 5-year loan prime rate, that's a reference for mortgage rates, 3 times last year to stimulate the market. The central bank also outlined 16 steps to ease liquidity concerns in November. A dynamic mechanism was also launched to lower the down payment ratios and mortgage rates for first-time home buyers. Many local governments also loosened curbs on home purchases. And officials pledged on Tuesday more steps to boost demand for first-time home buyers and home upgraders, while also stepping up the timely deliveries of pre-sold homes. Well, policies announced by central and local governments here in China have started to have a positive impact on the property market and fostered a recovery in home prices in some cities. Experts are expecting further recovery in overall prospects for the housing sector later this year. Our Yun Jinyi has more.
On a month-on-month basis, new home prices in 4 first-tier cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou, reported unchanged during December, compared to the 0.2% decrease registered the previous month. Prices in the second-hand home market in the 4 cities eased back by another 0.5%, however, more than their 0.4% decline during November. Housing experts say the fall in home prices results from falling sales by floor area due to COVID-19 restrictions.
The transaction volume of pre-owned homes in Shanghai went down sharply last year to around 160,000 units. Buyers were confined to home and were unable to make purchases for nearly a quarter of the year due to COVID-19. At the same time, new home construction was quite active in Shanghai, especially at the end of the year, with enough supply and strong demand from home buyers in the city.
Real estate markets in lower-tier cities have continued to ease. New home prices in second-tier cities went down by 0.3% month-on-month in December, while prices in third-tier cities edged down by the same amount. To help the cooling property markets in those cities, the government has launched a flurry of supportive policies to boost the housing demand, including a cut in the minimum down payment ratio. Supports have also been given to the supply side, such as extending financing to the real estate sector to address developers' liquidity problems. Experts are expecting things to begin looking up.
For example, many cities are now relaxing restrictions on household registration, which will boost the housing demand. On the supply side, developers are receiving more financial supports, such as allowing them to gain financing through the capital market. And in 2023, more credit and tax policies are expected to be improved, which will further stabilize the housing market by encouraging more buying.
the government's top economic planner, the National Development and Reform Commission also said last month that it is working on more plans to improve the housing rental market, while continuing to ensure that customers are in the market with the aim of personal occupancy, not speculation. Yingjun Isis for CGTN Shanghai.
And for more on China's economy in 2022, in 2023 and beyond, let's bring in Robin Xing, Chief China Economist at Morgan Stanley. My colleague Zheng Junfeng also joins me in the studio here in Beijing. Robin, thank you for joining us on the program. So first question to you is your take on China posting 3% growth in 2022, despite all the economic headwinds that we saw last year.
Thank you, Mike, for having me here. The data today told me there is an earlier and stronger cyclical growth recovery is taking shape in China with ongoing travel and business normalization. Take the December data as an example. I think a growth recovery probably has started in late December. That means the initial shock from reopening appears to be peaking ahead of expectations. Mobility in urban China has made a strong comeback, evidenced by the traffic in highway, the passenger turnover in subway. In fact, most of these top 100 cities showed a very strong rebound in all these mobility trackers. I think that's the reason why today's data beat market expectation. We see an earlier and a stronger recovery as the reopening is becoming a tailwind for economic normalization.
Right. Thank you for joining us, Robin. Junfeng here. I want to ask you a question about fixed asset investment because demand was weak relatively in 2022. So fixed asset investment was a pillar for year 2022. We saw it grow by over 5%. Well, we understand that fixed asset investment, among it, the very important part, infrastructure, was largely driven by government, but manufacturing investment and especially high-tech manufacturing investment grew very significantly from 7 to 9%. They were mainly driven by private and overseas investors. How come these investors remained very bullish in production and investment while demand was relatively weak?
Well, two takeaways. First, expectations start to improve. We did a lot of surveys on multinational firms, on Chinese manufacturing firms, and they showed despite all these on and off restrictions during COVID time, Chinese supply chain remained very resilient, probably the most resilient among global peers. So from a longer term perspective, most supply chain managers, external business partners, they found the Chinese supply chain very reliable. They want to do business over the longer run. But the second point is, after the reopening, finally, business has a stable expectation on how to operate for next year. There is no more on and off lockdowns. So I think that helped to revive the confidence of putting more money on the table for CapEx. So the two takeaways, China's success of maintaining supply chain resilience in most of the time of last 2-3 years, and then you have the reopening further reviving some confidence about future CapEx.
Right. Robin, so you are expecting a consumption-led recovery in 2023, and you mentioned that we are seeing an earlier cyclical growth recovery. So if that's the case, could we expect then a faster and sharper rebound in activity than expected?
Yes, I do think so. Consumption recovery will probably start to kick in the first quarter, earlier than anybody expected. We expected the real household consumption growth to rebound to 8.5% in 2023 from zero growth in 2022. Coupled with sustained government consumption, that means a very strong comeback of Chinese consumption. This could be achieved with two things. One is the excess saving Chinese household had in last 2.5 years, which is equivalent to about 15% of annual consumption. That money, that deposit has been sitting there, and if the pent-up demand being unleashed with the normalization of travel, tourism, entertainment, that could support some recovery in consumption. But secondly, probably more importantly, is job market. In the last 2.5 years, the COVID restrictions sometimes costed a lot of underemployment in these offline services sectors, entertainment, restaurant, you name it, travel. And if the reopen is happening, eventually these sectors will start to hire again, bringing back more than 11 million jobs. So I do think consumption will have a strong comeback and earlier than most people expected, supported by the healthy household balances plus improved job market expectation.
Robin, the 8.6% consumption growth for year 2023 is very positive. You said that consumption could come back much earlier than expected. How early could it be? Could it be right after the New Year holiday in February, or could it be until some time later, like the second or third or even fourth quarter of the year? And would it automatically come back, or would more supporting policies be needed?
Well, that's a great question, Junfeng. I think both Mike and you can see what's happening on the ground from your window. The street in Beijing is now packed, the traffic is back, and from all these macro data I track, mobility is having a very strong comeback in 98 out of these top 100 cities in China. So I do think from here until maybe the end of the Chinese New Year, we will see further normalization of traveling, of tourism. By summertime, this loss during COVID time in offline services consumption will be largely compensated with this pent-up demand. And then the next stage in the later end of this year will be this continued improvement in job market will drive Chinese consumption to its underlying potential growth, even beyond pre-COVID level. That's the next stage, but I'm pretty upbeat about that.
Great.
That's right, Robin. Outside our windows, Junfeng, we see the traffic jams are back in Beijing. The subways are packed as well. Foot traffic increasing on a massive scale in the malls as well. So we are seeing a consumption rebound already, and it's only in January. Robin, stay with us. We're going to come back to you in just a second. Robin Xing, Chief China Economist at Morgan Stanley there. We're going to check back with him in just a short moment, but we are going to take a short break right now and take a quick look at some of the major business and economic headlines from China in 2022. Well, data from China Customs show that the country's goods imports and exports hit a new record in 2022. Imports and exports of goods rose 7.7% year on year to over 42 trillion yuan, or about $6.2 trillion US dollars. Now, of this, the total value of exports reached almost 24 trillion yuan. That's up 10.5% year on year, while the total value of imports was over 18 trillion yuan, a 4.3% increase on a yearly basis. Now, China's trade surplus for 2022 stood at 5.9 trillion yuan. General trade imports and exports grew by 11.5%, accounting for nearly 64% of total imports and exports. Meanwhile, imports and exports of private enterprises increased by 12.9%, accounting for almost 51% of total imports and exports. Well, last year was the first time that China's trade value topped the 40 trillion yuan mark for the first time. Shanghai had a major role in facilitating international trade in 2022. For more on the outlook of China's foreign trade, let's bring in Zhang Shixuan in Shanghai. So, Shixuan, how did foreign trade manage to show robust growth last year despite all the global economic uncertainties we saw?
Michael. If there is a way to describe the foreign trade business for the past year, it would be challenging, but with a lot of potential remaining. In the first half of last year, the Yangtze River Delta region was actually hit hard by the outbreak, but things picked up quickly in the third quarter. And Shanghai's foreign trade volume still topped more than 4 trillion yuan for the second consecutive year in 2022. And high-tech has been an increasingly preferred specialty for Chinese exports. Specifically, new energy was among the sectors most favored by overseas buyers. NEV exporters have been expanding their overseas markets in Europe and even in Australia. And Shanghai Haitong International Automotive Terminal saw vehicle throughput ranking first in the globe last year. And photovoltaic product makers here have also posted strong export growth. Back to you, Michael.
Well, Shixuan, with China now adjusting its COVID-19 control and prevention policies, what's the outlook for China's foreign trade going forward?
As we enter the year of 2023, the entire Shanghai port is now operating at its normal capacity, handling around 130,000 standard 20-foot equivalent containers a day with almost no vessel congestion. For more than a week now, the port operations have gradually returned to what they were before the outbreak. And just last year, the Shanghai port opened a new distribution center for empty containers to better serve shipping demand. However, one of the major challenges for trading firms since November has been lower demand from Western countries, many hit by record high inflation. So multiple provinces, including Zhejiang, Jiangsu, and Shandong, last month began organizing business delegations to explore overseas markets, and some have already brought back promising order books. So international travel is now a lot more convenient, making it much easier for trading firms to contact their overseas clients regularly, pitch for new orders, and dig into new markets. Back to you, Michael.
All right, many thanks for that report. Zhang Shixuan for us in Shanghai. Well, goods made in China have always been popular in overseas markets. My colleague Li Lu brings us some of the most sought-after items overseas. Take a look.
For overseas consumers, a healthy pickup in exports from China means they get to buy a greater number of goods made in China. So which of these goods are the most popular? Join me as we find out the most sought-after items. And first on our list are high-speed trains. The super sleek high-speed train completed a test run in Indonesia in November. At a top speed of 350 kilometers per hour, it will reduce the travel time between Jakarta and Bandung to just 40 minutes from over 3 hours when it starts operations in June. The high-speed railway is a highly complex system. And on the Jakarta-Bandung line, the Chinese element is visible everywhere, be it the railway system, technology, and components. This is the first time that a Chinese high-speed train has been exported to another country with complete Chinese technology, standards, and equipment. And there's definitely more of such cooperation coming as China's Belt and Road Initiative gains speed around the globe. I think many would agree that this year's World Cup football final between France and Argentina was one of the best in recent times. And for those spectators who were lucky enough to be in Qatar, they must easily remember the Lusail Stadium, which was built by a Chinese company. The Lusail Stadium was the main venue for the Cup finals. In the stadium, there were 3,600 square meters of LED screens built in China and 80,000 seats built by China and Qatar. Footballers, viewers, staff all hopped on new energy vehicles that's made in China. And if they decided to take a souvenir back for their loved ones, they're taking home again something made in China. China is the world's largest maker and buyer of cars powered by green energy, a huge market on its own. Yet, more and more new energy vehicles made in China are eager to go abroad. By the time this footage goes on air, you'll already get the full year number. But to give you a general idea, for the first 11 months of 2022, China's exports of NEVs more than doubled from a year ago. NEVs have also contributed to an 80% increase in total auto exports. Demand for green energy surged in 2022 as countries around the world sought cheaper and greener energy. Surging energy prices brought by the conflict between Russia and Ukraine have inflicted heavy financial burden for European consumers, and their demand for energy-saving products made in China continue to grow rapidly. Exports of solar cells from China rose nearly 75% during the first 11 months of 2022. Also getting popular are solar and wind power modules, as well as other energy-saving products like home power kits. To keep warm in the winter, an electric blanket can come in handy when electric bills are getting out of control. That is why Chinese manufacturers are receiving an avalanche of orders from Europe recently. According to an industry report, in 2022, home appliances exported from China to Europe had seen growth in such products as air conditioners, heaters, and hair dryers. But electric blankets have seen the fastest growth among all these home devices, almost doubling the number sold in 2021. 1.3 million of electric blankets were sold to 27 EU countries in July last year, up 150% month-on-month. There's another thing made in China that's too big to ignore: an LNG tanker. It can carry liquefied natural gas across seas. Natural gas is liquefied at minus 162 degrees Celsius at atmospheric pressure. And loading LNG at such low temperature is what's making the shipbuilding extremely difficult, but highly value-added. During the European energy crisis, a record number of new orders of LNG tankers eventually reached Chinese shipyards. They received orders for 45 LNG tankers by late November, about 5 times their 2021 order values, according to shipping data provider Clarkson's research.
And China continues to be an attractive destination for foreign investors despite the challenges it faced last year. Our Aaron Liu spoke to Michael Hart, president of the American Chamber of Commerce in China, to find out more about how overseas companies view the Chinese market.
Thank you for accepting our interview again. The last time we spoke was a year ago. Has there been any change in the economic environment in China and the rest of the world?
It's great that China is open again. That was our #1 advocacy point in 2022. People wanted to travel to China. How can we get here easier? How can we get the quarantines reduced? Of course, China is in a competitive market. And people are looking at not only China, but other markets in Southeast Asia. And the thing that we consistently hear is China is a place unrivaled. There's no other place in the world that can do the scale of manufacturing that China can do, the advanced manufacturing that China can do, that has the supply chain that China has. And so for manufacturing, for advanced manufacturing, China will continue to be a very important market for a whole host of sectors. And so we definitely talk to companies about that all year long.
The U.S.-China relationship, one of the most important bilateral relationships in the world today, is attracting much attention from the world. In what areas do you expect further cooperation between China and the U.S. in the future?
So first of all, you're right. The U.S.-China relationship is one of the most important in the world. Of course, from our point of view, one of the fundamentals, particularly the consistent parts, is business. So business continues to play an important role in keeping U.S. and China cooperating. We did see some big improvements on the political side towards the end of 2022. So it was very good to see President Xi and President Biden meeting in Bali. So that was, I think, putting a floor under the relationship, allowing us to all step back and sort of say, we need to work together. So that was a good signal. Of course, in late 2022, early 2023, a number of working level meetings to pave the way for additional government-to-government meetings in 2023.
How do you see the Chinese market and economy in 2023 as the Chinese government optimizes its pandemic prevention and control initiatives in an orderly and effective manner?
I do think that the Chinese economy has become an important engine of growth for the globe. I mentioned tourism. Tourists are very important, but also just China's overall economy. So companies in China, consumers in China, even if they don't leave China, their consumption here is a very important driver of overall global growth. Many years ago, China was only a place that produced and exported. Now, of course, China imports a lot. If you take the United States, there's a number of high-value goods that are sold into China. And then things like agricultural products. China continues to be one of the most important markets for U.S. agriculture exports. I know my friends in other countries say China is also important for them. So China, the China consumer, very important for global economic growth.
And for more on foreign direct investment into China and China's foreign trade, let's bring back Robin Seng, Chief China Economist at Morgan Stanley. I want to begin with FDI first, Robin, because taking a look at the numbers, foreign direct investment inflows into China in the first 11 months of 2022 already surpassed what was a record high we saw back in 2021. So it seems like, Robin, that businesses around the world are voting with their feet to seek more opportunities in the China market, despite a rise in global complexity and uncertainty then.
Yes, you are definitely right. This geopolitical development recently is getting a lot of attention from investors, from multinational firms, but China shows very little appetite for any hard decoupling with the West. China appeared even with more opening up, more reform measures, particularly joining a few international, multinational, free trade pact, and also try to get more competitiveness in terms of a green transition, in terms of the high-tech investment, by opening up its market to foreign investors without any joint venture requirement. So that's going to strengthen China's ties with the global economy, strengthen its attractiveness to certain direct inflows. So we see China showed very little appetite for any hard decoupling. In fact, it's working in the opposite direction by opening up its market. That would help to stabilize some of these expectations on maintaining supply chain presence in China. That's one of the reasons why we have witnessed such a strong FDI. But of course, there is a lot of structural headwinds. There is still a lot of geopolitical stuff unfolding. So I think China has to do more, try to stick to this opening up approach. So far, so good.
Right. And Robin, what's your take on foreign trade maintaining a strong level of resiliency despite elevated global economic uncertainty last year and pandemic control measures here in China?
Well, I would say last year, the U.S. economy was still quite resilient. The inflation was very high, so they have been hiking interest rates, tightening. Inflation was the key concern. But this year will be very, very different. After such tightening in monetary conditions, you will see the U.S. economy slowing quite meaningfully, barely growing at all. And the Europe economy is likely ending up in a recession, also due to monetary tightening to deal with all these energy crisis and inflation. So for the Western world, 2023 will be a year of either recession or barely growing at all. That means a softness for Chinese external demand. So I do think there are headwinds for Chinese exports in 2023. But the good news is we have also seen China focusing on domestic demand. It's the first time in about 4 years, every policy from COVID to regulation to economic policy like fiscal and monetary are finally aligned in a pro-business fashion from the top to the local government authorities. So I do think this could offset these external headwinds on exports.
Robin, real quick, we are expecting a downturn in the global economy and a lot of weakness from advanced economies. China is expected to outperform in 2023. How much will China's growth support global growth this year?
Well, our estimates showed if China can reach, say, 5.7% growth, that's our forecast, it will contribute 40% to global growth this year, even higher than a normal 25 to 1/3 contribution from China. So this year, 2023, will be definitely a year that China contributes a lot more doing the heavy lifting job for global growth.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Many thanks for your thoughts on all of this. And thank you, as always, Robin. Robin Seng, Chief China Economist at Morgan Stanley. And we also spoke to a number of chief economists and experts to get their views on China's economic performance for last year and the outlook for 2023. Take a listen.
China fourth quarter GDP beats most of the analyst forecasts. That reading paved way for the Chinese economy to have a more smooth start in 2023, at least.
Retail sales, service industry in particular, will enjoy a very high potential for repair this year.
With the full launch of the registration-based system, IPO financing and refinancing of A shares will remain active.
We still maintain an optimistic attitude towards China's economic growth this year, and the GDP growth will rise to around 5% under our neutral estimate.
It's been a tough year for the Chinese economies, but I have very high expectations for 2023.
Nevertheless, I think the China economy next year is very much hopeful, and the world is very much looking forward to this as well.
And let's get to the equity markets. Tim Pope joins us from Shanghai with the latest and the year-to-date performance of Chinese equities. Tim, so take us through the market action in Asia first. And of course, it's now 2 weeks since the markets opened for 2023, and the rises have been quite notable on the Chinese mainland and Hong Kong. So tell us, Tim, what's behind that?
Thanks, Michael. We will start with today, of course. China's 2022 economic data did dampen sentiment a little bit for the Chinese mainland and Hong Kong markets. There was a pretty buoyant start to Monday, but the weaker fourth quarter GDP left the Shanghai Composite and CSI 300 pretty flat today. There were some modest gains in Shenzhen, though. We had China's leading insurers and liquor makers the biggest losers as investors took some profits a little. In Hong Kong, the picture was fairly similar. The Hang Seng ended 0.8% lower. Losses for insurance firms there too, alongside Macau casino operators. In Japan, the markets reversed yesterday's losses and bucked the regional trend. The yen was slipping back off its highs from yesterday, giving some power to auto stocks in Japan. The Nikkei 225 added 1.25%. And of course, the Bank of Japan's critical two-day policy meeting got underway today, with some speculation that the bank will adjust monetary policy settings again after the shock that it gave the markets with a tweak last month. But it seems like the market's thoughts on that have faded a little since Monday, and there is little serious expectation of any serious policy moves. As to the year so far, it has been a pretty robust start to 2023, particularly for the Chinese mainland and Hong Kong markets. The Shanghai Composite, despite a couple of small corrections, has managed to lock in gains of 4.4% in the last 2 weeks of trade. In Hong Kong, the surge has been even more pronounced. The Hang Seng has risen by 8.9%. Both these indexes, though, are still playing catch-up. Last year was pretty bruising, and both the Shanghai Composite and the Hang Seng are lower today than they were at the start of 2022. But there are two major moves that we've seen from the Chinese government since the end of last year, which have been fueling this fight back. The first, obviously, is the removal of COVID-19 restrictions, which can pave the way for an economic rebound. That, more than anything else, has breathed optimism into the markets. There is another that has had more impact in Hong Kong, but is still important, and that is the Chinese regulators wrapping up their overhaul campaign of the tech sector. While that process was ongoing, investors lacked a bit of certainty, and we can see that certainty returning to tech stocks. Take Alibaba for an example. It is up 31.4% in the last 2 weeks. There's also been some renewed bullishness from international investors. We've had a couple of sessions of very strong buying of Chinese mainland stocks over the Stock Connect links after some strong remarks from global investment banks on Chinese equities. But the consensus does seem to be that as we get further into the year, the broad-based surge that we've seen so far will give way to a more fundamentals-driven rally for Chinese equities. That's going to depend on individual company performances, which in turn is going to depend on the speed and strength of China's economic rebound. That's it from me for today, Michael. Back to you.
All right, many thanks for that update. Tim Pope for us in Shanghai. Well, China's job market showed remarkable resilience in 2022 despite COVID-19 disruptions in the spring and the end of the year. Unemployment peaked in April as a wave of COVID infections swept across major cities, but it quickly declined afterwards. The overall jobless rate remained higher than the pre-pandemic levels of around 5%, with the 16 to 24-year-old group under pressure. But things among them did start to get better in the next few months. And of course, here comes a bright spot. China added over 12 million jobs in urban areas, well above its original annual target. Now, with the efforts of individuals in their life, China's residents' income saw steady growth in China last year. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, nationwide per capita disposable income of residents rose 2.9% after deducting price factors, maintaining a similar growth rate at the economy of 3% growth. In terms of permanent residents, the average annual income growth rate of rural residents was 4.2%. In real terms, that's higher than urban residents' income, with a real growth of 1.9%. Over the past year, the Chinese government has promoted the development of people's livelihoods through stronger tax and fee cuts, employment policies, and a better social welfare system. And for more on ensuring people's livelihoods here in China, as well as China's labor market, let's bring in Wang Dan, chief economist at Hang Seng Bank China. And my colleague Zheng Junfeng also joins us again. Dan, welcome to the program. So first of all, China has maintained a consistent stance of ensuring and improving people's livelihoods despite global economic uncertainties or domestic economic headwinds. How was China able to keep inflation in check and ensure food and energy security for its people despite high and volatile global commodity prices around the world?
Well, inflation is ultimately a monetary phenomenon. China's monetary easing has been quite conservative since COVID had started, despite of the pressure coming from the Federal Reserve's interest rate hikes. And when it comes to the agricultural production, it has shown a fair amount of flexibility. China's staple grain production has actually hit a historical high every single year since 2020. China's largest food reserve system in the world has also helped to stabilize the urban prices when the food inflation is going up. The government was able to distribute food, especially pork and wheat, in a very rapid manner. And when it comes to the energy security, it seems that China was able to put a very strict price control on coal producers and gas importers. Therefore, they cannot charge as high a price as they would like for retail prices. And on top of that, there was also an effort to connect green energy to the national grid, therefore to stabilize the price for electricity.
Dan, thank you for joining us. Junfeng here. I want to ask you about the job market. China added 12 million new jobs in urban areas, outpacing the government's target. But the younger people's job market, still facing challenges, about 3 times the unemployment rate than the normal overall employment rate. How would new jobs be added? How could the challenges facing young people in job market being eased in 2023? Do we expect more jobs added after the consumption being restored or even before that?
Well, when we look at the job market situation in 2022, it seems that the government was quite able to add more employment through the public employment system. All levels of government, state-owned enterprises, research facilities were able to increase their employment while keeping the existing workforce. And in 2023, however, we have seen this increasing challenge already across the board, because many companies are trying to increase efficiency by lowering their labor cost through restructuring. And by restructuring, a lot of the methods were concentrating on replacing human with machines or artificial intelligence by basically reducing the headcount. So the expansion of real economy would be the key to revive the labor market. And this year, we will see more effort probably from the local government to implement more training programs for workers in the construction and manufacturing sector in order to facilitate their job transitions.
Well, Dan, per capita disposable incomes in China grew generally in pace with economic growth in 2022. And the highlight here are rural incomes, which outpaced overall income growth by 1.3 percentage points. What does that say about the resiliency of the Chinese economy, despite the challenges we saw last year?
The income growth for urban residents were hit the most by COVID control in 2022. But for rural areas, the situation was quite different, because food prices were much higher in 2022 than the year before, which worked in favor for the farmers. And we have seen this transition from lower quality of food processing to higher quality of food processing. And e-commerce, through all different kinds of platforms, have helped with this transition. And in the coming few years, especially this year and next year, the urbanization will create more growth in income, and it will trickle down from the bigger cities to smaller ones and to counties. That can create more job opportunities. And we know that in this region, people have a higher propensity to consume, and that can create more opportunities for the retail market as well.
All right, we can leave it there. Many thanks for your thoughts on this. Wang Dan, Chief Economist at Hang Seng Bank China. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jinfeng, you know what's going to support jobs this year and support that consumption-led recovery that Robin Ching was talking about? The return of travel. It was interesting. The other day I was on my couch and I was just surfing through the number of cities that I want to hit this year. For example,
expensive.
Well, so many places I want to go and take advantage of China's high-speed rail network. I mean, it's so fast, 3 hours, maybe 2 hours. You get to a major city and just have fun and just travel. What about you?
But I've navigated on those travel agency websites. The places I want to go to are getting so expensive. The hotel rates, because people, after staying at home for some time, want to spend quality holidays at some faraway exotic places around the country or even outside of the country, and they could find those rates being surging because demand has been rising up so quickly during the 7-day New Year holiday period. It really shows that the pent-up demand will be released. We just hope that the demand would continue to be there even higher after the New Year holiday, which ends by the end of January or the beginning of February.
Well, I mean, I'm ready to consume for the Spring Festival holidays, right? We're talking about movies, we're talking about malls. You mentioned exotic places. We're going to see a return of Chinese tourists overseas, of course. Is there a destination that you really want to go to?
I wanted to go to ski places in southern coastal areas.